Dr. Daniel Whitfield had built an entire career and quietly rebuilt an entire life on one unshakable belief. Numbers did not lie, but people almost always did, even when they sincerely believed they were telling the truth. A chemical reaction did not care about your feelings. A mass balance either closed or it did not. For 7 years, that belief had been the only steady ground beneath him. This was especially true at the Thanksgiving table of the Whitfield estate in Houston, which was never a place of gratitude. It was a pressurized room of quiet judgment. His father, Gordon Whitfield, sat at the head of the long mahogany table like a monarch who had never learned how to step down. Gordon's hands were thick and heavily lined, a lasting reminder of his early years on Texas oil rigs, before he climbed the ladder to become a corporate director at one of the nation's largest oil companies. Beside him sat Daniel's mother, Margaret. Her composure was as sharp and cold as a crystal decanter. Her spine stayed perfectly straight, and her face held the polite, practiced calm of a woman who had spent 30 years smoothing over other people's discomfort. Next to her sat Daniel's older brother, Preston, a senior petroleum engineer with the brisk, unshakable confidence of a man whose career path had been paved, step by step, by their father's name. They smelled faintly of crude oil and old boardroom leather, and of an aggressive brand of success that measured a person's worth strictly by barrels pumped per day. And then there was Daniel, a man who had traded a birthright of generational oil wealth for a chalkboard, a modest state salary, and a laboratory at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. To them, he was the outlier in the family equation, the one number nobody could make balance. "Pass the turkey, Danny," Preston said, leaning back in his chair with the easy, entitled slouch of a man who had never once doubted his place at the table. His voice carried that familiar, polished condescension that landed harder than an open insult ever could. "I caught your paper in the Journal of Chemical Engineering Science last month. Still trying to run combustion engines on cornstalks? Cute niche you've carved out, little brother. But seriously, if you ever get tired of scraping by on grant money and a state paycheck, my division in Houston is scaling up. I could slot you in as a technical consultant. Triple your current salary on day one, benefits included." Margaret sighed, her fingers drifting to adjust her pearl necklace with practiced elegance, her chin tilting up just slightly, the way it always did when she decided a conversation was already settled. "Your brother has a point, Daniel. It breaks my heart, you rattling around that cold Wisconsin apartment after all those years of schooling."
Dengarkan
Gordon,
baik-baik
say something.
nasihat ayah
Gordon did not
ini.
simply speak. He presided.
Kamu harus lebih
He set his wine
serius
glass down with a
mengelola
heavy,
hidupmu.
deliberate thud that silenced the table before
Jangan
he'd said a
sampai
word.
kamu
His jaw
menyesal
set,
di
his
kemudian
shoulders
hari.
squared toward his youngest son like a man addressing a subordinate rather than a child. "You're burning your prime years, son. A doctorate from a top program, and you spend it fermenting biomass in a basement lab. It's a dead end. The world runs on petroleum. It always has, and it always will. Pride is keeping you poor." Daniel took a slow sip of water, feeling the familiar tightening across his chest. He kept his voice level, his shoulders still, his hands loose around the glass, operating under what he privately called his law of emotional conservation. Spend nothing you don't have to. "The world is changing, Dad. The chemistry of the future isn't about pulling carbon out of the ground. It's about managing what's already in the air. The chemistry of the future doesn't pay a mortgage today," Gordon snapped, his voice climbing, his eyes narrowing into the glare that used to make entire boardrooms fall silent. "Look at the life you've chosen. You isolated yourself up north for what? To be an underpaid public servant." He didn't understand the silence that followed. None of them did. They looked at Daniel's isolation and saw stubborn academic eccentricity. They never saw the crater that had been blown into the center of his life exactly 5 years earlier. Her name had been Elena, a brilliant botanist with a laugh that could dissolve the most stubborn academic stress, the kind of laugh that made colleagues forget what they'd been arguing about. 5 years ago, an aggressive uterine cancer had spread through her body like an uncontrolled chain reaction, each cycle faster than the last. Daniel spent months at her bedside, watching her vital signs fade on a glowing monitor. He threw every bit of his scientific mind at an opponent that simply refused to follow the laws of logic. When she died, she took the horizon with her. They had never had children. They had only ever had each other. In the wake of her death, his laboratory stopped being a place of employment and became something closer to a monastery, a life support system built out of glassware and grant proposals. He poured every sleepless midnight hour, every fractured piece of grief, into the cold, dependable precision of chemical reaction engineering. Where human biology had failed him, molecular bonds still obeyed the rules. He buried his sorrow in 5 years of relentless work, turning crop waste and used cooking oil into clean-burning fuel, and finding new ways to pull carbon back out of the sky. Grief became the catalyst, the trigger that accelerated everything. A little over a year into that grief, a new materials scientist joined his group. Dr. Naomi Reyes, freshly out of a postdoc studying catalyst materials, was sharp-tongued and entirely unimpressed by his reputation for silence. Their first months of working together were mostly friction. She pushed back on his reactor designs in group meetings without an ounce of deference, arms crossed, chin up, never once backing down when he pushed back harder. And he found, to his quiet surprise, that he didn't mind. She never once tiptoed around his grief the way everyone else did. She simply left coffee on his desk on the mornings he looked like he hadn't slept, said nothing about it, and went back to her own bench without waiting to be thanked. It became, without either of them naming it, the one relationship grief hadn't been allowed to touch. To his family, he remained a lonely, underpaid widower clinging to an insignificant university career. The condescension was never confined to his parents and Preston. Both branches of the family, the Whitfields and, through Margaret, the Crosses, formed one wide, interlocking network of oil money. They all regarded his career choice with the same practiced contempt. 2 years after Elena passed, 3 years before the retirement party that would upend everything, the whole clan gathered for a summer reunion at an upscale country club outside Austin. It was there that the usual passive-aggressive prodding escalated into something closer to a siege. His uncle, Russell Cross, Margaret's younger brother, and a famously independent oil wildcatter, cornered him near the outdoor pavilion bar with a tumbler of scotch already half gone. He swayed slightly on his heels, with the particular loose confidence of a man 3 drinks into a party he felt he owned. Beside him stood his wife, Aunt Constance Cross, whose entire social standing came from the size of her husband's fortune. Her eyes made a quick, practiced sweep of Daniel's plain blazer before settling back on his face with polite disappointment. "Danny boy," Russell boomed, clapping a heavy hand onto his shoulder. "Your daddy tells me you're still up there teaching kids how to ferment cornstalks. Tell me straight. Does the state give you a discount at the grocery store? Or are you living on academic prestige alone these days?" A few cousins nearby laughed. Constance offered a tight, ornamental smile with no real warmth in it. "Oh, Russell, don't be cruel. Daniel does noble work. It's just, well, Daniel, dear, look at your cousins, look at your brother. Preston just closed on a second home in Cabo. Russell's boys are clearing 6 figures in bonuses before they're 30. We worry about you. Especially now that you're entirely on your own. Without Elena, who's going to look after you when the university cuts your budget?" Hearing Elena's name used that way felt like a burn against exposed skin. Daniel's jaw tightened. The knuckles wrapped around his glass went white. "My budget is secure, Aunt Constance," he said, his voice dropping an octave, flat and precisely measured. "Secure?" Russell scoffed, taking a long pull of his drink. "Son, let me give you a hard lesson in practical economics. You're playing in a sandbox funded by federal grants and soft-hearted university regents. That's charity, plain and simple. If you had half your daddy's backbone, or mine, You'd bring that expensive brain of yours down to the Permian Basin. I could put you in charge of a field crew by Monday. You'd clear more in a single quarter than you make in 5 years of grading term papers. Why do you insist on being the family's charity case? I'm not a charity case, Uncle Russell, Daniel said, stepping closer, his posture rigid, his shoulders squared. And with respect, your read on energy economics is badly out of date. You're trading in something finite that only runs out. You measure success by how fast you can empty a well. I measure mine by what still works 50 years from now. Gordon walked up then, having caught the tail end of the exchange. He didn't step in to defend his son. He stepped in to back up his brother-in-law. Russell's throwing you a lifeline, Daniel. Don't let stubborn pride wreck your life. Look at the car you drove up in. It's embarrassing. You live like a graduate student while this family runs half the energy sector of this state. We're tired of making excuses for you at the club. Daniel looked at his father, then Russell, then Constance. For a moment, he felt the old urge to lay out the facts, to tear down their certainty with the sheer weight of his actual life. He didn't. The moment wasn't right yet. He wasn't ready to let it out. "Excuse me," he said quietly, and walked away, leaving them to their comfortable, worn-out story of his failure. He stopped correcting their assumptions after that afternoon. It felt pointless to explain a life they had already decided not to believe in. Family gatherings simply became the regular place where they picked over every choice he'd made since Elena died. He texted Naomi from the parking lot before he'd even reached his car. 3 flat sentences, no context. Her reply came back before he'd found his keys. Asterisk, tell Uncle Russell field crew is corporate for roughneck with a company truck. Also come back to lab. I broke a piece of equipment and I'm too proud to call Dave. Asterisk, he laughed out loud, alone in a country club parking lot, for the first time in 2 years. He drove back to Madison that same night. Naomi had the lab's gas chromatograph half taken apart on the bench when he walked in, and she didn't look up. "You're back early," she said. "Family stuff go that well, or that badly?" "Both," he said, and picked up a wrench. What none of them knew, what they could not have imagined through their narrow view of success, was that while they were counting barrels, Daniel had quietly built an intellectual empire of his own. In the years since Elena's death, his laboratory had grown into one of the leading hubs for bioenergy and carbon reduction research in the country. He wasn't just teaching a few sections of undergraduate thermodynamics. He was leading a team of postdoctoral researchers, chemical engineers, and material scientists across 3 connected labs, with Naomi running catalyst research as his closest research partner. Over those 5 years, his group had quietly filed for and been granted more than 20 foundational patents through the international patent system. They had developed custom catalysts and multi-stage reactor systems that turned crop waste and used cooking oil into clean diesel fuel, processed efficiently enough to make commercial-scale licensing genuinely attractive to fuel producers. But his true masterwork, the project born out of his darkest year of grief, was a system that captured industrial carbon dioxide before it left a factory smokestack. His team combined that captured CO2 with clean-made hydrogen over a specially designed catalyst that Naomi herself had spent 2 years perfecting, then ran the mixture through a multi-step chemical process. The output wasn't fuel. It was benzene, toluene, and xylene, the basic building block chemicals used to make plastics, fabrics, and countless other everyday materials. They were the exact chemicals the petrochemical industry spent tens of billions of dollars a year digging out of crude oil. Daniel had found a way to skip the oil well entirely. He had figured out how to mine the sky. By the time Russell was offering him a job running a field crew in the Permian, Daniel's patents had already been licensed by manufacturers in more than 30 countries. Royalty payments quietly built up in accounts he rarely checked. He didn't drive a luxury car or buy a place in Cabo, not because he couldn't, but because none of it held any value for him. Every spare dollar went back into the next reactor design, the next pilot scale trial. He wasn't poor. He was simply operating on a scale his family had no way to measure. The turning point arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening at a family gathering held at the Whitfield estate to mark the first anniversary of Gordon's retirement from the company board. Everyone was there: Gordon, Margaret, Russell Cross, Constance Cross, Preston, and half a dozen cousins. Naomi had called him that afternoon before he left for the airport, saying it was about a comment from a journal reviewer, though they both knew it could have waited. "You sound like you're bracing for a root canal," she said. "It's dinner, not a tribunal. With my family, the difference is small," he said, and she laughed, low and easy, a sound that stayed with him the whole flight to Houston. "So glad you could make it, Daniel," Margaret said, in a tone that suggested his presence was closer to an obligation than a joy. Russell smiled and patted his shoulder on the way past. "Still out there adventuring with your students, thinking up ways to keep the county from drowning in trash." Daniel knew they were bracing for the usual round of gentle mockery. He simply gave a faint smile. "Still alive and well, Uncle Russell." For a moment the room seemed almost startled by how little there was to react to. Then the tension eased as they registered that he was, once again, simply letting it go. The house carried its usual self-congratulatory hum. In the formal living room, the evening business news played softly on the enormous television. Gordon liked to keep it running in the background at that hour, a habit from decades of watching energy markets move. Daniel sat on the arm of a chair, nursing black coffee, half listening to Preston walk Russell through his division's latest drilling numbers. Then the anchor's tone sharpened, shifting from routine market commentary into something bigger. In a major announcement this evening, the Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, the branch of the department that funds new clean energy projects, has finalized a landmark funding partnership to support the industrial-scale rollout of a new carbon capture technology. Gordon glanced at the screen, mostly out of habit. Then a graphic appeared beside the anchor's shoulder, the crest of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Daniel went very still on the arm of the chair, both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, his eyes fixed somewhere past the television rather than on it. It was the posture of a man who already knew exactly what was coming, and had simply been waiting to see how long it would take the room to catch up. The award includes $180 million in direct federal funding, matched by $200 million in private industrial capital, for a total project value of $380 million. It will be led by Professor Daniel Whitfield, a leading researcher in industrial carbon reduction. Professor Whitfield's team will oversee the rapid scale-up of a patented catalyst technology that converts captured CO2 directly into industrial-grade chemical feedstocks, a technology expected to reshape the economics of American manufacturing over the next decade. The living room dropped into an immediate, suffocating silence. The ice in Russell's glass stopped clinking. Preston froze mid-sentence, mouth slightly open, eyes fixed on the screen where a photograph of his younger brother, composed and unsmiling in a lab coat, filled millions of television sets across the country. The segment showed footage of Daniel's facility, noted the international scope of his patent portfolio, and called the grant one of the largest industrial carbon reduction awards the department had made to a university-led team that decade. The anchor did not describe him as an underpaid professor. She described him as one of the architects of the next energy economy. Slowly, painfully, Gordon turned his head toward his son. Margaret's hand had frozen near her pearls, her jaw slightly slack. Russell stared down into his scotch, his face flushing a deep, uncomfortable red, while Constance suddenly found the pattern of the Persian rug intensely interesting. $380 million, Margaret whispered. "Oh my God." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For 7 years they had judged him through the narrow lens of their own certainty, treating him as the family's cautionary tale, offering him condescending lifelines, entirely blind to the fact that he had outpaced every one of them on a stage none of them had ever thought to look at. The reconciliation did not happen overnight, but the family's mood changed for good that evening. The patronizing remarks disappeared, replaced by a careful, almost respectful caution. Preston's emails grew longer and more thoughtful, asking, genuinely, for the first time for Daniel's opinion on where the energy market was heading. 2 months later, Gordon flew up to Madison. He didn't call ahead. He simply appeared at Daniel's office on a Tuesday afternoon, looking strikingly smaller outside the weight of his Houston boardroom. He walked slowly around the room, his eyes moving over the framed international patents and the honors from 3 continents on the walls, and finally stopped in front of a small photograph of Elena on the bookshelf. When he turned to face his son, his eyes carried a heavy, unfamiliar exhaustion. "Daniel," he began, his voice stripped of its old corporate authority. "Your mother and I want to apologize. Russell and Constance too, though they're too proud to say it themselves. Your mother already gave her brother an earful on the drive home from the club, 2 years back, for what it's worth. We spent 7 years treating you like a problem to be solved. We couldn't see the return on your investment, so we assumed there wasn't one. We were arrogant. I'd like to build a bridge back to you, son, if you'll let me." Daniel looked at his father and felt no petty rush of triumph, no urge to hold his success up like a trophy. Losing Elena had burned away whatever capacity he'd once had for that kind of small malice. "Sit down, Dad," he said gently, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. Gordon sat, looking up at him with an expression Daniel had never once seen on his father's face, a genuine willingness to learn. His hands, usually restless with authority, sat quietly folded in his lap, and his shoulders had lost the boardroom set Daniel had known his entire life. "I accept the apology, Dad. And I want us to be a family again," Daniel said, leaning forward, choosing his words with the same care he'd give a technical report. "But if we're going to build something real, you need to understand the actual basis of my work. I didn't build this to prove you, Mom, or Preston wrong. And I didn't do it to get rich." He gestured out the window toward campus, where students crossed between research buildings in the crisp afternoon light. "In your world, success is about accumulation," he said, steady and deliberate. "It's about how much money you can take out of the system and lock away for yourself. But look at that practically for a second. Money sitting still, doing nothing, is a stagnant number. It doesn't fix what's broken. It doesn't make the machinery everyone else depends on run any better. It just protects the person holding it." He held his father's eyes. "Real success isn't what you take out of the system. It's what you put back in. My technology keeps industrial manufacturing running while pulling millions of tons of carbon out of the air every year. It closes a loop. Waste becomes something useful instead of a burden. Every sleepless night after Elena died, every failed experiment, every dollar I reinvested instead of spending, all of it was meant to make the system run cleaner and more reliably for whoever comes after us. That's the real measure, Dad. If you're not using what you have to make life measurably better for the people around you, then it doesn't matter how high your profit is. Your true net yield is still zero." Gordon listened in total silence, visibly working through a definition of value that had never once appeared on a balance sheet. He didn't argue. For the first time in his life, he simply took it in. A faint, humbled smile finally broke across his weathered face. "I think," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm finally starting to understand your chemistry, Daniel." Daniel smiled back and reached across the desk to grip his father's hand, firm and warm. The relationship wasn't fully repaired in that single hour. 7 years of friction don't dissolve on contact. But the blockage had cleared. The reaction had finally started, and for the first time in 7 years, father and son were moving toward balance. Gordon left a little before 5, promising to call Margaret from the car, already rehearsing, out loud and half to himself, how he was going to explain public-private funding to Russell without sounding like he was reading off a cue card. Daniel walked him to the elevator, and when the doors closed on his father's still faintly stunned face, he let himself, for the first time that day, actually laugh. He turned back down the hallway and nearly collided with Naomi, for years into their partnership now, and still, as far as he could tell, the one person in the building who had never once needed his patents explained to her twice. "That was your dad in the elevator," Naomi said, arms crossed, one eyebrow already climbing. She had a coffee stain on her sleeve and the specific, dangerous look of someone who'd been listening at the door for at least part of it. "The Gordon Whitfield, in khakis. Did you two hug? I need details. I need a full breakdown of this emotional reaction." "We shook hands," Daniel said. "It was very moving, very stable, low activation energy." "Uh-huh." She fell in a step beside him, close enough that her shoulder kept brushing his. "So the man who once called biofuels a hobby for people who don't like money just flew 4 hours to tell you he's proud of you." "He didn't say proud. He apologized. In your professor voice. On a Tuesday." Naomi grinned, the kind of grin that made the corners of her eyes crinkle first. "That's basically a wedding vow for a man like that. And yes, I was eavesdropping, reviewing catalyst data directly outside your open door. Completely different activity. For what it's worth, I like the line about net yield. Very you. Slightly insufferable. Effective. High praise. The highest I give before 6 p.m. They'd reached her office door, and she stopped, tilting her head up at him with an expression that had stopped being purely professional months ago, an expression both of them had, by unspoken agreement, declined to name out loud. "So, big day. Federal grant secured. Estranged father humbled. Entire family rebalanced before dinner. How does a man celebrate a day like that?" "Statistically," Daniel said, with takeout and running some numbers on Thursday's experiment. "Statistically incorrect." Naomi reached out and straightened his collar with 2 fingers, an entirely unnecessary adjustment that neither of them commented on. Her knuckles grazed his throat for half a second on the way down, and neither of them stepped back. Up close like this, she had to tilt her chin up to hold his eyes, and she did, unhurried, like a woman who had already decided she wasn't going to be the first one to look away. "The correct answer is dinner. With me. Somewhere with tablecloths, so you have to use actual manners for once instead of eating, standing over the fume hood like a raccoon. That happened one time. It happened Tuesday." She was already walking backward toward the stairwell, laughing at whatever expression had crossed his face. 7 o'clock, Whitfield, with a good sweater, the one without acid burns. She got 2 steps down before she stopped and turned back, and for once there was no joke sitting ready behind her eyes. Just something quieter underneath it. "Hey," Daniel looked up. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice dropping out of its usual banter register. "I've spent 4 years watching you turn the worst thing that ever happened to you into something extraordinary." "That's not nothing, Whitfield." She said his last name softer this time, without any of its usual teasing edge. "That's not nothing to me." The hallway went very quiet. He held her gaze a beat longer than a colleague would, long enough that neither of them could pretend afterward it hadn't happened. Something in his chest, some old, careful mechanism, quietly stopped counting. "Naomi, don't." But she was smiling again when she said it, the softness folding itself carefully back into a grin, a hand pressed briefly, almost involuntarily, against the doorframe to steady herself. "Save it for dinner. I want the good version, not the fume hood version." She held his eyes 1 second longer than the joke needed, just long enough to make sure he understood exactly which version she meant, and then she was gone, her footsteps unhurried on the stairs, in no rush at all to outrun whatever had just passed between them. He stood there a moment with his pulse doing something distinctly nonlinear, watching the empty stairwell where she'd been, feeling something loosen in his chest that had been clenched, quietly for 5 long years. Not gone. Never entirely gone, but no longer carrying all the weight on its own. For a man who had spent a decade trusting numbers over people, it struck him as strange and entirely right that the only problem he currently had no interest in solving was the one who had just walked down those stairs grinning like she already knew the answer. 7 o'clock, he called after her. "I'll even wear the sweater." "Obviously," she said, without turning around. "I already laid it out on your chair this morning." He looked down at his desk. She had.